As we are waiting for the formal beginning, perhaps I'd like to ask you, or rather share something that's um, pretty silly or light. Um, at this current moment, do you think there is one thing that's so common between you and me? Well, that is, you don't know what I'm going to say. I also don't know what I'm going to say. Okay. Should we begin? Yeah? Okay. So, distinguished uh, friends, fellow learners who are here at the program today, um, I would like to take you to a small experiential journey, especially when you were students or when you were in school settings. Perhaps there might have been occasions where the ideas of justice or safety or inclusion might have come to you, but you felt that it was something left for courts and class lawyers. Yeah, how many of us in our classrooms when we were kids felt that there was a little bit of unfairness or injustice happening to us when we were in our classrooms, when we are, of course, also in our families? How many of us feel sometimes that justice has not been served to me? And when we do so, imagine we don't look at the law of books. I'm sorry, books of the law. We don't look at the big, thick volumes of justice and see and check and examine whether justice that I felt or injustice that I felt was as per the books of law. So the notion of justice is something that goes so beyond and so broad that we in our lives experience. And today, when we talk of justice and when we talk of education, we generally think of justice as like courts, right? Lawyers, there are points, arguments, counter arguments, and there's a verdict. And when we think of education, we think of the students, chalkboards, whiteboards, and the noise of listening. But let me tell you one simple fact that we haven't spoken out so much up until today, I would say, which is that justice does not begin in courts. It begins in classrooms where we feel we belong, where our voices matter, where we are part of that classroom and our presence is an asset. That is why we talk of justice begins from classroom slogan. As you can see, many students every day in Nepal and in the world go to school, and they go to schools with various backgrounds. Some of them can't speak fluently Nepali, for example, or English. Some can't hear properly what's been said. Some can't see properly. They might have low vision, like sometimes I do too. Sometimes they are so much at the margins of gender, caste, class-based discrimination. All these burdens students carry when they go to schools or colleges or learning centers. But are these burdens visible? I don't think they are. We haven't talked about them actually so much. And those voices go unheard, unseen, and unrepresented forever. So these many stories of exclusion are actually stories of ours. Yeah, as you can see, when we don't feel included, that is when we feel that injustice or injustice has been taking place to me. And therefore, I believe that the first instance of injustice that we face, in our lives is not legal. That's educational. That happens in our classrooms. And I face that so many times, when you are excluded just because you can't give a proper answer, or you can't see the way teacher has taught you, or you can hear the way teacher had taught you, or you are confused between the B and D's, remember? That is when you feel teased or ashamed, and you feel excluded at that very moment. That is what brings us to the ideas of inclusive education. So The whole idea is that everybody should feel safe in the classrooms and they should be included inside the classrooms. In all of our journeys up until today, remember how many times our presence was celebrated inside classrooms? How many times? Perhaps you were there, you were not there, but the teacher continued to teach in the way that he or she liked to teach. Perhaps you were familiar with the verbal methods of expressing, but you have to write them, and then you fail. Perhaps the time of 3 hours or 4 hours wasn't enough for you because you could write slow. You knew the answers, but your writing speed was slow. But you were assessed for writing and not the knowledge, and you failed, and I failed. So these stories of exclusion have to meet somewhere the notion of inclusive education. So the idea of inclusive education, therefore, is not something about pedagogy. Pedagogy, by that, what I mean is the way we teach or learn. It's much more than that. It's making people feel that you are here, you matter, and the way you learn matter as well. If we now imagine, at this very moment, what is your best way of learning? It could be pictorial method. It could be visual method. I can probably learn better if there's a video or if there's an audio, but we are forced to write them, and then I fail, or then I get a score that is substandard, and I get judged or assessed, and that assessment or the judgment becomes a certificate of my knowledge or wisdom, which I carry for my whole life. So inclusive education, therefore, is not about teaching per se, it's about including people so that they feel safe and just. For example, if there is no now a ramp here, how could someone with a wheelchair come to the stage, for example? Or maybe we can think of the auditorium, or we can see sometimes these kinds of facilities being made and some benefits, some don't benefit. So it's all about not fixing the student, but fixing the environment, how they grow. So if, as they say, if the students don't learn the way we teach, perhaps we have to learn the way they learn. But we go on fixing the students and we say, you are not so quiet, you are restless, you are a slow learner, and then that exclusion begins. So the gate of a school, therefore, is a gate of a justice or fairness. The more you include, the more inclusive they feel, the more just they feel. The more you exclude, well, those exclusions become the curriculum of the society. They'll feel excluded in the society as well. There have been many discussions about, who should be changing, whether it's children or the system. And we often tend to think that it's the children who should muster up the courage. They have to make all efforts while the system will wait you to see how you perform, without understanding your learning needs and so on. I think the diversity of learning is perhaps all within us at the moment, I believe. So this is one example where people with disability, persons with disability, face injustice. Although there are many rights given to people, the rights don't give justice. And this big example of our big leader from disability, Dr. Birendra Das Pokhrel, shows that even though you have rights full in the books of law, that's void of justice. People are still fighting for those deeper needs for inclusion inside classrooms. And since the 1980s, we have moved from various models of disability. Sometimes we say that they are medically incorrect. Sometimes we look at the deficit, and we've moved towards right-based models. And this very design called universal design for learning has been in place since the 1980s. But we now add a little bit of extension towards that, and we say that when we design for learning, we also design for justice. So it becomes universal design for learning and justice. And in many instances, the question is not about access only. You can go to school, but then you feel excluded outside the classrooms or school compounds. So the questions have to be, I would say, much deeper. How did the exclusion begin? How do we think of excluding someone, or how do we not think of including someone? So these deeper, root-based questions are the questions that we should be asking. We have to look at the way we can transform systems, our classrooms, for example. They have to be designed in the way that everybody can learn, not in the way that some specific person can learn or average person can learn. That is what we call transformative education. And we've seen that in many settings, perhaps also in our communities. We've seen schools where we have this display of inclusion, banner inclusion, tokenistic inclusion. We say we celebrate all festivals. We have all diversity in our classrooms, but have we prepared a system that addresses that exclusion? If that's not happening, perhaps we are not addressing the justice needs of that whole society. So we have to go beyond the posters, beyond the pamphlets, beyond the words, beyond the verbose, beyond textbooks. We have to look at the context and not just the text. Then we can start thinking about more inclusive society, inclusive classrooms. There are many stories. Perhaps we have a story, a of these stories around. Somebody goes to a school, and then she has hard of hearing difficulties in hearing. So she's at the back. She doesn't raise hands when she's asked to answer a question. She doesn't have many friends, and she avoids being noticed. She avoids attention. So these are stories that happen a lot. I go to school, and because I speak a certain form of Tiwari language or Tamang language, and if I speak with that accent, I become a person of fun. Or if I don't speak English properly, I become a person of fun. So in those instances, what a teacher could do, or what a teacher did, was brought the child at the front row, perhaps, wrote the key points in big bullets so that she can see and everybody can see. She made her friends work with her, and she now feels included. The smile comes back. She starts raising hands, and she feels that she's part of the classroom. And imagine when somebody is part of classroom or a school, they'll feel that they're part of the society as well. And there are many stories of students being harassed because of the gender or disability, and then they discontinue schools, and they feel excluded, not just in schools, but also in society. So the question is, our schools, have they been enough inclusive? So what is for us then? Yeah, for policymakers or for those who think about us, perhaps we have to think of inclusion as the foundation, not as an add-on or additional feature, but something that becomes the foundation of our society. For communities and parents, well, if there is injustice in a classroom or a school, remember that injustice will be replicated in communities. We can't think of a just society when our classrooms are full of injustices. Of course, if you go by the reverse, if our classrooms are fair, just, and inclusive, our societies will be of the same features. And schools and teachers, of course, teachers are the first justices, judges. They're the ones who give a badge to students whether they're right, wrong, failed, they've succeeded in their lives, and people carry those badges throughout. So teachers, your roles are crucial. Peers, your roles are crucial. Sometimes we often say that we go to schools because there was a teacher who actually made us feel like going to schools. I think in our journeys, in our lives, there was someone who made us feel that we would like to go to school every single day. And remember, there was also someone who was the reason of our fear. I didn't want to go to school because of that person, because of the way he or she looks at me, characterizes me. So it can go anywhere. So the teachers and the peers and the school community has a big role to play. And therefore, I think and I believe and I'm committed to the fact that when we build classrooms, when we build community inside the classrooms, we're not just teaching. We're building foundations of peace. We're building foundations of society that is just and society that belongs to everybody, not to some people on their average. We are building a feeling that society belongs to everybody. We are building perhaps a nation where everybody feels that they belong. And my friends, perhaps that's the direction we have to go. And also, let's be the reasons why our friends come to school. Let's be the reasons why somebody has a hope in us, hopes in them. Let's build that society together, and that begins from a classroom. So justice begins from a classroom where where the students feel valued, their voices matter and count, and where they feel included. I think that peace, that inclusion, and that justice is possible within classrooms if we all try together. Thank you.